The rain was a steady, rhythmic assault on the windshield, a relentless drumming that had long since worn away the last vestiges of Robert's patience. He'd been on the road for what felt like an eternity, the desolate ribbon of asphalt stretching out into an unyielding darkness. His sedan's headlamps were a meager defense against the black, carving out a small, temporary pocket of light in the vast emptiness. The fatigue was a lead weight pressing on his skull, a heavy cloak he couldn't shake off. He pushed on, clinging to the faint hope that the next curve in the road would reveal the blessed neon glow of a motel sign. His mind, lulled into a state of semi-consciousness by the hypnotic drone of the wipers and the hum of the engine, was a haze of half-formed thoughts and memories. He thought he saw a flash of movement on the side of the road, a fleeting shape that could have been a trick of the light or a deer caught in the downpour. He blinked, trying to clear the mist from his brain, and kept driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The silence in the car was profound, broken only by the shushing of the tires on the wet pavement. It was in the moment he looked back at the road, after a brief, heavy-lidded glance at the rearview mirror, that he saw it. He wasn't sure how it got there. He hadn't seen a thing, hadn't heard a sound, no click of a seatbelt, no settling weight on the upholstery, no creak of the door opening. But sitting in the passenger seat, leaned back against the headrest, as if it had been there for 100 miles, was a figure. Robert's breath caught in his throat, a sharp, panicked gasp that felt like a knife twisting in his lungs. His foot instinctively stomped on the brake, and the tires screamed on the slick asphalt. The car fishtailed violently, a terrifying dance of metal and momentum. Before he fought the wheel and, with a shudder that ran through the entire chassis, brought it back under control. He stopped, his car now a crippled thing on the shoulder of the road, facing the encroaching darkness. The figure didn't move. It was slumped in the seat, wearing a tattered trench coat that looked ancient and waterlogged, its fabric clinging to an impossibly thin frame. But it was the head that truly froze Robert's blood. The face was a mask of gray, leathery skin stretched taut over a bare skull, the jawbone stark and horrifyingly distinct. The eye sockets were two gaping voids, framed by brittle, cracked skin that looked like old parchment. Patches of hairless scalp were visible, and the lower jaw was slack, hanging open to reveal a grotesque absence of flesh. Just a dark, hollow cavity. The skin around its neck was a lattice of black, decaying tissue, and a foul, damp odor filled the enclosed space of the car, a stench of wet earth and a grave freshly disturbed. It was the smell of something long dead and forgotten. A choked sob escaped Robert's lips, a desperate plea for reality to reassert itself. He fumbled for the door handle, his hands shaking violently, his mind screaming at him to escape. But the ghost slowly, deliberately, turned its head towards him. The movement was slow and unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by rotting strings, the vertebrae of its neck grinding with a dry, clicking sound. A thin guttural rasp scraped from its throat, a sound like gravel on a tombstone, and it wasn't coming from its lungs, but from the very air around them. Lost, it whispered, the sound a mix of sorrow and emptiness. Need a ride. Robert's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He felt a profound, bone-deep cold seep into the car, a cold that wasn't from the rain, but from something ancient and unnatural, something that existed outside the laws of nature. The windows began to fog up from the inside, a hazy film spreading across the glass, obscuring his view of the outside world and trapping him in the car with the thing. "Please," the figure rasped again, its voice filled with a bottomless, unearthly sorrow. The dash lights, which had been a comforting green glow, flickered and died. The radio, which had been silent, suddenly crackled to life, but it wasn't a station. It was a cacophony of distorted whispers, overlapping and wailing in a language no man had ever spoken, a chorus of despair. Robert frantically tried to open his door again, pulling on the handle, but it was locked. The child safety lock was on, a feature his car didn't even have. He looked at the thing in the seat beside him. Its hand, a desiccated claw of black, mottled skin and bone, slowly lifted and rested on the dashboard. The dashboard plastic sizzled, and a smoking black fingerprint was left behind, a permanent scar on the car's interior. A low chuckle, dry and lifeless, came from the thing. "I found you," it whispered, its voice now laced with a cold, triumphant malice. "Now you're a passenger, too." The car, still in neutral, began to move. It pulled back onto the road, picking up speed, but Robert wasn't touching the pedals. He wasn't steering. He was a silent captive in his own vehicle, being driven by something unspeakable. The ghost turned its face toward him, the hollow eyes a bottomless void of despair and malice. And Robert could see within those empty sockets the faint, shimmering images of 100 other terrified faces. The road ahead wasn't just dark anymore. It was a consuming black, a hungry maw that devoured the light from his headlamps. The whispers on the radio grew louder, transforming into a chorus of tormented screams, and Robert realized he recognized some of the voices. The fleeting shape on the side of the road, the lost travelers from the local legends he'd read about. He finally understood. This wasn't a hitchhiker. This was the road itself. A hungry, spectral thing that had been waiting for the perfect host. It had chosen him. And now, as his own terrified scream joined the chorus of wails on the radio, he was a part of it. One of the many voices forever lost on the road, waiting to be seen. The clock on the dashboard cast a sickly green glow, its digital numbers a stark 2:17 a.m. The low, monotonous hum of the car engine and the rhythmic of the windshield wipers were the only sounds filling the tired silence between Lucy and Ryan. They were on their way home from a friend's party, both mentally and physically drained. The high fives and raucous laughter felt like a distant, alien memory. Ryan, his eyelids growing heavy, squinted at the seemingly endless ribbon of dark asphalt stretching before them. A fleeting memory surfaced. A tip from a coworker about a backroad route. "A total time saver," his friend had said. "I know a shortcut," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "It'll shave off 20 minutes. We'll be in bed before you know it." Lucy, her head a heavy weight against the cool glass of the window, just mumbled a weary agreement. Her trust in Ryan was absolute, but the notion of turning off the familiar highway for an unknown path sent a faint shiver down her spine. The shortcut was more than just a road. It was a sudden, jarring descent into an ancient-seeming darkness. The car's headlights sliced through a dense forest, illuminating tree branches that clawed at the night sky like gnarled skeletal fingers. The moon, a sliver of bone-white light, barely managed to pierce the tangled canopy, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and shrank with every turn. The air, once thick with the scent of damp asphalt, now carried a strange, earthy perfume, a mixture of wet leaves and something else, something metallic and cold, like rusted iron and stale rain. A growing feeling of profound unease settled over Lucy, a cold, heavy knot in her stomach that felt like a lump of ice. She turned her gaze to the window, the passing trees a blur of black and gray. And then she saw it. Beside a towering oak, a tree so old its bark seemed to weep and twist with age, stood a figure. It was a still, black silhouette against the slightly paler darkness of the woods. Its posture was unsettlingly rigid, a kind of unnatural stillness that didn't belong to anything living. She couldn't make out any features, but a flash of something shockingly white seemed to catch the scant moonlight. It was a face, pale as a tombstone, fixed in her direction. A hitchhiker? Here? The thought was absurd, a product of a tired, suggestible mind. She blinked, and the figure was gone, swallowed by the forest's impenetrable gloom. She tried to tell herself it was just her exhaustion, a trick of the light, but the icy knot in her stomach tightened, refusing to be dismissed. 5 minutes later, she felt it, a palpable coldness that seeped into the warm air of the car, raising the hairs on her arms. It wasn't the kind of chill that came from the AC or an open window. It was a deep, pervasive cold that felt like it had no source, a cold that bit into her skin and seemed to sink straight to her bones. It carried with it that same faint, rotten scent, like dead leaves and wet earth. Ryan, oblivious, continued to drive, humming a forgotten tune under his breath. He seemed completely unaware of the sudden, bone-deep chill that had just dropped the temperature in the car by 20 degrees. Lucy slowly opened her eyes, her throat dry, and the dread a bitter, metallic taste on her tongue. Her gaze, against her will, was drawn to the passenger seat. There, sitting perfectly still, was the figure she had seen by the tree. He was a nightmare, made flesh, or rather, made something else. His skin was a sickly, translucent gray, stretched so tight over the sharp angles of his face that she could see the faint network of veins beneath the surface. His hair was a matted, greasy mess, clinging to his temples and forehead as if soaked in something foul. He was dressed in a tattered flannel shirt and faded jeans that seemed to disintegrate at the hems, but it was his eyes that held her in a frozen stare. They were not eyes in the way she knew them. There were no pupils, no irises, no white. They were twin points of pure, malicious light, sharp as broken glass shards, and they were fixed on her with an endless, burning intensity. The gaze seemed to drill into her very soul, a silent and malevolent promise of something unspeakable. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Ryan was still driving, still humming, completely unaware. The ghost didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. It just sat there, the weight of its stare pinning her to her seat. A single tear traced a hot path down her cold cheek. She wanted to scream Ryan's name, to point and force him to see, but her vocal cords felt paralyzed. The air in the car grew heavy, thick and hard to breathe, as if the space around them were being slowly compressed by an invisible force. It was a suffocating pressure, a feeling of being buried alive. The silence from the passenger side was absolute, more terrifying than any scream. With a gasp that was little more than a choked sob, she buried her face in her hands, squeezing her eyes shut as tight as she could, praying with every fiber of her being that, when she opened them again, the nightmare would be over. The chilling cold of the car deepened, and the distant, reassuring sound of Ryan's humming seemed to fade into a hollow echo. A new sound filled its place, a low scraping noise, like fingernails dragging on a wooden board, coming from the passenger side. It was slow and deliberate, a sickening cadence. She felt a shift in the air, a movement of the chilling mass beside her. The sound stopped. A new sensation replaced it. A cold, dry breath on the back of her hands, the ones covering her eyes. She felt a phantom weight pressing down on her shoulders, and a whisper, thin and rustling like dead leaves, slithered into her mind. "You can't hide from me." The voice wasn't in her ears, but inside her head, a parasitic thought. She wanted to scream, but the pressure in her lungs made it impossible. With a violent, desperate resolve, she ripped her hands from her face, her eyes snapping open only to find the passenger seat empty. The cold was gone, the air warm again, and Ryan was still humming. But as she turned her head back, her eyes fell on the rearview mirror. Reflected in the glass, not from the passenger side, but from the back seat, were those 2 points of pure, malicious light, now closer than ever, just inches from her own reflection. The clock on Ariel's dashboard read 10:00 p.m., its pale green digits casting a dim, reassuring light into the otherwise pitch-black interior of her car. The last hour of her journey home was always the most draining, a long, winding road that snaked through the base of Blackwood Mountain. The path was lonely, bordered on one side by a dense, whispering forest, and on the other by a sheer cliff face that dropped into a valley she couldn't see. It was a route she knew by heart. Every curve and bump, every signpost that promised a distant, comforting civilization. But tonight, that familiarity was no comfort at all. A thick, unsettling fog had begun to creep in, a silent, milky shroud that swallowed the moonlight and made the trees on either side of her a menacing, indistinct blur. Her high beams cut through the suffocating darkness, illuminating a tunnel of trees ahead. As she rounded a particularly sharp bend, something flickered at the edge of her vision. A tall, impossibly thin shadow, a fleeting, formless column of black that slid across the road in front of her. It was gone in an instant, melting into the shadows on the far side. Ariel's foot instinctively moved to the brake, but then she eased off. It was nothing. Just a trick of the light. The way the headlights hit a tree just so. She knew this road, she told herself. There was nothing here. Just the lonely trees and the empty road. But a cold pinprick of unease had settled at the back of her neck. A foreign feeling in her car. She couldn't shake the image of that shadow, its strange, non-human quality. Her mind raced, creating explanations. An animal, a gust of wind blowing a stray branch. Yet none of them felt right. The shadow hadn't been an object. It had moved with intent, like a deliberate stain on the canvas of the night. It felt predatory, and she found herself glancing nervously into her rearview mirror, as if expecting to see something following her. A shiver traced its way down her spine. The silence inside the car, broken only by the low hum of the engine, suddenly felt deafening. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white, and without thinking, her eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't her. Looming in the back seat, directly behind her, was a figure draped in the somber habit of a nun. Her face, a deathly white, was framed by the dark wimple. Her eyes were two black, sunken pits, and the thinnest, most grotesque smile stretched her lips, revealing yellowed teeth. Her hands were clasped in front of her, the fingers impossibly long and gnarled, and they slowly, deliberately began to uncurl, one digit at a time. The nun's gaze, devoid of any warmth or life, was fixed on Ariel's reflection, a silent, damning indictment. Ariel's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her breath hitched in her throat, a strangled gasp that she couldn't release. She slammed her foot down on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, its engine roaring in protest as the tires spun for a moment on the slick asphalt. The speed was a desperate, primal instinct, a futile attempt to outrun the impossible. Her hands were shaking so violently that the steering wheel trembled, and she felt the vehicle swaying precariously on the winding road. But the faster she drove, the clearer the reflection in the mirror became. The nun's face began to press closer to the glass, her dark eyes filling the frame until they were all Ariel could see. A low, guttural sound, not quite a voice, but more like the scraping of stones emanated from the back seat. "You saw me," it rasped, the sound vibrating through the car's frame, a tangible tremor that rattled her bones. "You saw me and you drove on." The words seemed to cling to the air, icy and heavy with accusation. The road ahead began to blur, the trees a dark green smear on either side as Ariel's vision was tunneled, focused solely on the terrifying reflection. A new sound began to fill the car, a wet sucking sound that seemed to come from the nun's hands as they finally unclasped. One by one, the long, pale fingers began to tap on the glass of the rearview mirror, a slow, methodical rhythm that echoed in the silence. Each tap was followed by a tiny spiderweb crack, spreading across the surface of the mirror until the glass was a shattered mosaic of her terror. The car suddenly sputtered, its engine groaning before it died completely. The tires, now free of any forward momentum, began to whisper as the car coasted to a halt in the middle of the empty road. The dashboard lights flickered and went out, plunging the interior into total darkness. The only light was the faint, milky glow that seemed to radiate from the nun's habit, illuminating the back seat in a ghostly pallor. Her reflection in the mirror was gone. Ariel's head whipped around to the back seat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her eardrums. The nun was no longer there. The back seat was empty, save for the stillness. A sob of pure relief escaped her lips, and she slumped back into her seat, her head resting against the steering wheel. It had been a hallucination, a terrible trick her mind had played on her in the dark. It had to be. There was no other explanation. She reached for the key to restart the car, her hand trembling. As her fingers touched the cold metal of the ignition, a single skeletal finger tapped her on the shoulder. "I can help you get home," a raspy whisper breathed into her ear, the sound as cold as a grave. "I know this road very well, better than you."